Hello, everyone, and welcome back to 92,000 Hours, the podcast where we explore what it means to spend our long 92,000 hours of our lives at work, but to spend them with meaning and purpose. Today on our podcast, I am so excited because we are welcoming Felecia Maxfield-Barrett. Felecia is the president and CEO of Utah Global Diplomacy. And I should tell you that I serve on the board of this organization, so I know a little bit of something about it, and I have utmost respect for Felecia. Utah Global Diplomacy focuses on citizen diplomacy within the state of Utah, hence the name. Citizen diplomacy is the concept that every individual has the right and actually even the responsibility to help shape U.S. foreign relations by connecting with each other one handshake at a time. And their underlying mission is to promote respect and understanding among people. Felecia herself has more than 20 years of experience in government and nonprofit management, and she is fiercely dedicated to helping nonprofits make good business decisions using data-driven evidence. Her prior work history involves places like Refugee Services, the Office of the Department of Workforce Services, the Utah Refugee Coalition, and Wasatch Community Gardens. She serves on a bunch of international committees and clearly knows something about international relations. She has a bachelor's degree in anthropology and a master's degree in public administration, and she has recently graduated from the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Business Program. I'm so excited about our conversation today because she has chosen that we will be talking about subtle radicalism. Woohoo! All right, so let's get going on this. I'm so excited, Felecia, to have you join me on the podcast today.
Oh, thanks, Annalisa. I'm excited to be here.
Um, I've known you for so long, and we've had great opportunities to have interesting conversations about a lot of things, but what we're talking about today gives me so much curiosity about how this will come out today. So I can't wait to see.
Right?
But my first question, as everyone knows that listens to the podcast, is always what I call the big question. So, Felecia, for you, if you take away any reference to work, to work awards or the things that we always talk about in terms of what do you do? If
hmm
you were to take that away and I were to ask you, what is it about you that you're most proud of as a human being? Uh, what would that be?
And this is different than what is my word that I would use to
That's
describe
right.
me. Is that right? Okay. I am I allowed to swear on your podcast?
Yes,
Okay.
people have done it before. It's okay.
Okay. That's the politeness coming out of me, right? As a Utah girl. It is that I'm able to figure shit out. And I have my entire life. I've been able to just figure it out and put together resources. And sometimes I ask really dumb questions, and sometimes I ask really smart questions. And what I find is that it gets me to connect with the people who have the answers. And when I can connect with people who have the answers, I can figure it out. So that's what I would say defines me as a person.
How do you apply that not just to your work life, but to your life in general?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll tell you a story that happened recently. So in September of last year, my dad passed away. And as far as family structure goes, I have my mom. They had been married for 43 years. And I have a brother, but my brother's no longer in the picture. And my mom, she married very young. And she went from her family's house into my father's house. And he pretty much took care of her his entire life, right? And when he passed away, he he had really great qualities about him, but he also left a big pile of crap for us to clean up,
Was that
which
was that surprising to you or
it,
not?
yeah, it was. I thought out of my mom and my dad, I thought in full transparency that if I had to clean up after one of my parents, it would have to be my mom and not my dad.
Mhm.
Because he always talked about having really strong work ethics and values and being prepared for emergencies. And I quickly figured out that he had a closet full of skeletons. And part of the closet full of skeletons is that he had not financially prepared for his passing. Now, he was young, he was only 64. And I don't think he anticipated it. Nobody anticipated it. It was really out of the blue. Um, but what happened was in dealing with all of that mess and trying to unravel that gigantic tangled ball of yarn, um, we pretty much had to become investigators. And I say we because it was me holding my mom's hand through the entire process and saying, okay, where do we go to find this document? And if we can't find this document, then we're going to have to figure out how to get that document.
Yeah.
How do we find out if he had any money with his job? Well, you've got to do this. You've got to call the employer, and they'll give you other numbers that you have to call. And you have to call and you have to ask him this question. Um, vehicles where we had lost the title. And so trying to figure out, and,
Wow.
once you start getting the government involved, it's just this bureaucratic nightmare. Like, what are the steps you have to take and really dissecting it down into, okay, step one, you do this, step two, you do this, step three, and then also looking at who is the community around me that has gone through this before, maybe not the exact same situation, but I might be able to just say, hey, who do I contact for this, this situation? Um, an example is I had met this really incredible business owner who specialized in Social Security benefits. And Social Security for me is like, oh, I don't even know
Yeah.
how to start navigating that. But when my dad passed away, I picked up the phone and I called him and I said, you know about Social Security benefits. Do you know how I can get my mom signed up on survivor benefits? And he told me, and it was really helpful and was able to give us some inside numbers. So it's like little things like that because in starting out my young adult life, having to figure it out along the way, I feel like it really prepared me for this gigantic figure it out so that I could then empower my mom to get to a position where
Mm.
she was financially free. So going back again to where my dad had been taking care of her, she had made no financial decisions in their relationship. She didn't know how to create a budget. She didn't know what money was coming in, what money was going out.
Right.
And I remember sitting her down at the very beginning and saying, look, mom, we're not only going to make you financially free, but we're going to have your money work for you so that you are in control of your finances. And I remember she just broke down crying because she said, nobody has ever told me that I have that ability and freedom to be financially sound. She was like, I
Wow.
just always relied on your dad. And so it was just like, my whole life has been giving to, working for nonprofits and helping humanity and, trying to make the world a better place. And it sort of just all came together that it was all in preparation to just make sure that the
Your
most
mom
vulnerable
was okay.
person and my mom could survive. Like, yeah,
Isn't
it
that
was,
amazing? I am with you. I just need to tell you that I share that when my dad passed away at 64.
mm,
Interesting. Um,
mhm.
my mom, it had been probably 2 decades since she had put gas in her own car.
Oh, that's unbelievable.
And she called me crying, saying, I don't even know how to do this. It looks way different than it used to. Your dad just filled up my gas tank every week. And so, like, helping her relearn, I feel that, but I also am really interested because one of the things that you said was about um, freedom and your mom having freedom. And I think that word probably means I'm really interested in how that word might align with the subject matter we're talking about today. And the work that you do, because they're like
Mhm.
that word of freedom can be so deep in ways that we don't necessarily understand. And
Mhm.
particularly, I have to say, this is from my own perspective, but particularly for women,
Mhm.
like what does it mean to have freedom?
Yeah.
And for all sorts of marginalized communities. So, um,
Mhm.
all right, so let's talk about when I asked you, okay, I said, we're going to talk about change makers and people who are making change in our society. And I always use a word to help us have kind of a theme around what we're talking about. And I even suggested a whole bunch of words to you. I said, like, what, you could talk about this or this or this. And you said, I know what I want to talk about.
Yeah.
So explain
Before,
to the listeners what that word, like what you want to talk about and why you chose that, because I love it and I can't wait.
yeah, can we go back to that word freedom though, really quickly? Because
Yes, absolutely.
I just want to share some personal insight about that. So I'm a first generation college student. As I mentioned, my parents got young very early. They got married when they were 16 years old. I have an older brother, so I'll let you put the pieces together. Why? And just as any parents, they wanted me to do better than them. And what that meant is they wanted me to not get pregnant in high school and they wanted me to graduate. Um, there was no conversation of you go to college. And so I didn't get pregnant and I graduated from high school and I go, well, now what am I going to do? And all of my friends were getting ready to go to college. And so I'm like, well, everybody says you go to college after high school. So that is exactly what I did. And I packed up my little red Ford Festiva roller skate with all of my belongings. And I drove down to Cedar City, Utah. And I went into an advisor's office. And I think this is like a day, maybe 2 days before school starts. And I said, okay, I came to college. Now what do I do? And she just looked at me like I was crazy. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, well, I don't know how I'm going to pay for college. And I haven't registered for any classes. And she said, well, let's sit you down and let's get you set up. And
Oh,
I remember,
was
yeah,
she nice to you during this?
she was very nice.
That's
She was very
nice.
nice. She sat me down and I think she ended up spending easily 4 hours with me. And we filled out student loan papers, which I had never heard about before. And she found me a job working for a call center. It's like one of two jobs that you can get in Cedar City back in the day. And we registered for classes. And I remember it was like the bottom of the barrel classes. So it was like 18th century Chinese history. And it was a level 400 or
Whoa.
4,000 creative writing class. And let me tell you, the first day I'm in class, the professor pulls me to the side and he's like, what are you doing here? You don't belong in my class. And I said, I've got to have your class because the advisor told me that I had to keep at least 12 credit hours in order to keep my student loans. And I have to have your class. There's no other class for me to go to. Is there anything you can do? And by the grace of God, he put me on a pass fail and I passed. And I honestly think I just barely passed. And he came up to me again and he's like, you need to educate yourself. And, you're lucky you passed this class. Don't do that again. Get ahead of the curve. But he's like, I want to see you back in my class when you're ready to take it. And I was like, great, I will do that. And I still have the book that he gifted me. Um,
How nice.
but
These
yeah,
are
but
good people to show up for you, though.
right, in the most simple way. And is
Yeah.
this weird thing between like being nice and being
And
kind
hard.
are not the same thing,
Yep.
right? People can be really nice and not kind, but people can be kind and not necessarily nice. And
Agree.
so, yeah,
Completely
it's
agree.
really interesting. So fast forward many, many years later, I graduate from college. I get a degree in anthropology. I decide that I'm going to work with refugees. And I was at Department of Workforce Services at the time. And so I transferred over to work. They were putting together the specialized refugee team because so many refugees were falling through the cracks. And so I was overseeing food stamps, Medicaid, childcare, welfare services. And I just remember thinking that the woman who took time out of her day to sit me down and just give me the resources, just walk me through and tell me, how do I go to college as opposed to you should go to college?
Yeah.
Here I was many years later, because it took me like 8 years to finally graduate from college. Um, that I was in the same position where people were sitting in front of me asking me, how do I survive in America? Because they were coming as refugees with the bags that they could pack on an airplane in tow, and that was it. And it was, well, let's teach you that you don't just have to survive, that you can actually thrive in America. And the simplest way is just what are the resources and what are the opportunities? And when you said freedom, it just made me realize that that's all that having access to opportunities are. Having the choices of whether or not you want to accept an opportunity or decline it.
That's exactly right.
That's what freedom is, right?
Exactly right.
Like,
Yes.
and there's so many people that don't even have access to opportunity or know how to find those opportunities. And therefore, they will never be free. And I feel like, to wrap this whole story back in, like that was the situation with my mom. She was never given the opportunity to make choices. So she never had freedom, which, I mean, that's the sad reality of the world we live in right now.
I am so thrilled that you talked about it. It makes me almost a little bit weepy because it resonates with me so much. And I think it will with so many people. My mother, I'm also a first generation college student, and my mother told me that she didn't care about whether it meant I had a degree or it meant I had a cool job. She talked to me about how it meant I had freedom. And
Mm.
um, and it was, and she literally used that word. She says, bachelor's degree equals freedom, and freedom in the way that she didn't have, like freedom to attend a parent teacher conference in the middle of the day, or freedom to say no to something that you don't want to do, or freedom to leave a job knowing you could find another one, or freedom to leave a marriage if you need to. Like she was like,
Right.
I hope you never need to do any of those things, but I want you to be equipped, and that piece of paper will help you.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
So let's, and I want to get to this because one of the questions that was really also fascinating to me, and I want to honor this in you, is that you talked about something that could be so difficult. I mean, like that memory of showing up in college could be so traumatic for you.
Mhm.
And yet you told this story that turned it around into a superpower in your professional life, which is incredible. Like this moment of not knowing and having such a traumatic experience that taught you something important, that led you to want to work with people who you knew would have that traumatic experience as well.
Mhm.
Who you then are serving in a way that you took that and turned it into something incredibly positive. And I think that
Mhm.
is an important lesson that I will take away and hold with me because it's lovely.
Thank you. Thank you. Um, so I think, I mean, that leads me to what my phrase
Yeah.
is and what
Yes.
I wanted to talk about. And it's I'm in my 40s. It's been a lifetime journey for me to figure out how all of these bits and pieces and life lessons sort of come together, and what is my story that I have to tell. And one of the things that I figured out really recently is that one of my absolute core values is that everybody on this planet is worth something. They are worth respect and worth dignity. And and when we don't treat each other with that worth, I think it just really hurts us all as a human race, right? And we see it so much these days. We are completely divided. And what divides us are these big topics that we absolutely refuse to come to the table and sit down with each other and talk to one another. And what, while I have my own labels for myself, first generation college student, a woman, at the same time, I also recognize that I was born and raised in American Fork, Utah, and had access to every opportunity you could possibly find, right? A very privileged background. Um, and so as I have lived my life and gathered other people's stories and listened to what they have experienced in trying to define what my role in life is, it's not to be the person on the stage talking about their woes and their injustices and all of the isms that come with that, right? Rather, what it is it's me, and here's my phrase, is just doing subtle radical movements to be able to push those who are not receiving the worthiness, the dignity and respect that they deserve forward just a little bit, so that the unfairness that the world is offering to them can be just a little bit more fair by creating the stage or platform or opportunity to get their voices out there and heard. So subtle, radical. And I'm really into etymology lately, the root of words. I think it's just so fascinating. And the root of radical is root, right? Meaning that it comes from the base. And it's just this idea or thought or action that grows and just subtly has just this little bit of a turn and springs off into something entirely different. And so it doesn't take, and this is for everybody, it doesn't take a whole lot of effort. It doesn't take radical change, although there is definitely a space for that for the right people. But for everyday people, it's just these subtle little movements, these subtle changes, these acts of kindness. Sitting down with somebody who goes to college for the first time, or sitting down with somebody who walked off a plane because they're running from war and genocide and displacement, to just say, you know what, I'm going to spend 5 minutes, I'm going to talk to you. Like, that is such a subtle, radical movement these days that can make an entire life change, the entire trajectory of people change just by little movements.
I love that. I looked up radical as well, and it's so interesting because the word can mean so many things.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, like, starting from the root, but people can be radical by being just different from the usual or traditional, or you can be
Mm-hmm.
radical by being just like the traditional but extreme, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you could be, and it's scientific and it's mathematical, because there are, like, you think of all of these words that have radical in them. Or
Mm-hmm.
I think of, I'm a kid of the 90s, and radical is cool.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I like to think of your subtle radicalism as also cool. And I think that aligns with your, like, I also think that you're cool. And there's some, like, stories that you probably have for me about your cool background. And which leads me to that. Like, did you always know that you were subtly radical? Like, kid growing up in American Fork, Utah?
Yes, yes. Sometimes it was society telling me that I was radical. So born and raised in an American Fork, I am not part of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but rather I grew up Pentecostal.
Oh,
And
wow.
for those who don't know what Pentecostal is, it is the speaking in tongues and rolling on the floor. And there's even sects of the faith that handle snakes, right? Like it's a radical religion for sure.
Wow. I didn't even know it
Yeah,
was there in
yeah,
Utah. I didn't even
yeah.
know.
It was this little like beautiful church. I remember they had the most beautiful bell that would ring on Sunday mornings, called Rock Canyon Assembly of God. I don't even think it exists anymore. Um, but yeah, so I had society tell me that I was radical just because of
Yeah.
who I was and what I believed in. And I never wanted, I just didn't want to be normal. And so, in high school, I'm pretty sure some people would have called me goth or, alternative, whatever you want to call it. Um, I remember going to dance clubs at 16. There was one in Salt Lake called Confetti, and I would go to that dance club where they let kids smoke. And even though I never smoked, yeah, so I always had a sense that I didn't want to be the same. Um, and then from there, when I realized that I didn't want to be goth forever, then it was a change over to being ska, being part of the punk scene, a rude girl, riding scooters around. And it was all about the music, it was all about the message in the music of and talk about subtle radicalism. Like music is such an incredible tool to bring people together, but to make people think that maybe systems need to change. Um, and yeah, and so music, I remember going to this concert, and it was in the industrial part of Salt Lake. And the crowds were definitely fighting with one another. And my boyfriend, who's now my husband at the time, was like, "Oh, we got to get out of here. This is not going to end up good." And as we're walking outside, the riot police show up, and we're like,
Wow.
"Oh my gosh, okay, we're out of here for sure." Um, yeah, but it was something to give a young person without any direction at the time a little bit of meaning and something to critically think about, and listening to the lyrics and the music and why are people saying what it is that they're saying through these songs.
That's so interesting. When you think about um, subtle radicalism, how does that express itself? I understand how it expressed itself as you were growing up, but how do you then apply it in a professional sense?
Mhm. Yeah, I'll definitely talk about the work that I do at Utah Global Diplomacy. Um, so Utah Global Diplomacy, being a nonprofit for 60 years, it's soft power diplomacy. It is diplomacy that is for the people as opposed to diplomacy that is for the governments. And so what we do
What
is we
does
bring
that
in people.
mean? I apologize for interrupting, but like, what's
Yeah,
the difference between diplomacy for the people and
oh,
diplomacy for the governments? What does that mean?
yeah. So I mean, I think we see this all the time in things in conflicts that are going on around the world. And I'll take Russia and Ukraine, for example. When the Russian Ukrainian war started, so many people were saying, "Oh, it's the Russian government that is invading Ukraine. It's not the Russian people. Like the Russian people aren't supporting this. It's the governments that are." And so when you think about traditional diplomacy, it is the negotiation between government entities. So it's so much larger than what you or I can do, right? I mean, there are think tanks, there are embassies, there are ambassadors, there are policy experts. There is a whole line of people that are influencing based off of these logic models and these policy models of the past on how governments will interact with one another and what are the consequences, like sanctions, god forbid war as part of that. um, is so much bigger. But when we talk about soft power diplomacy, it doesn't require government intervention. It could be, and I mean, social media is such a good example of soft power diplomacy. You can get onto any kind of social media platform and talk to anybody from around the world, right? So it's me and you just meeting each other and shaking hands and sitting down together and saying, what do you do and what do I do? And how are we trying to make the world better together? It's just that simple, right? So examples of soft power diplomacy could be sports, culture and arts and entertainment. It can be music, it can be books are a really great example of soft power, business to business interaction, all of it that sort of takes the governments out of the equation and just says we're going to have people meet each other from around the world. And so that's what we do. We're Utah's leading nonprofit when it comes to soft power diplomacy. So what we do is we invite people from around the world. It's about 400 people a year, 125 different countries to come here. And they have a very specific reason that they're coming here. It could be that they're looking at business relations or government accountability. It could be like we're talking about a program that's archaeology and paleontology right now, which I'm so excited if we get that program. It could be the digital economy, rule of law, interfaith dialogue. And what we do as an organization is we look at who are the case studies and the people here in Utah that are doing really interesting things to address that same issue here. And we facilitate meetings between these international guests and the people in Utah. And that's the whole idea, is just to get them to meet each other and shake hands and sit down together and say, what are you doing and what am I doing and how can we work together? Um, and so,
And
so
gosh,
this,
Felecia, there's something so beautiful about that, that human beings from different countries who speak different languages, who have different backgrounds, ultimately are working on solving similar problems and
yeah,
are also, like there's like this difference and then there's so much similarity that we have across cultures.
right, right. And so I'll share a story with you really quickly. So we're part of this larger network of nonprofits. There's about 86 of us across the United States. So almost every major city has some kind of organization like ours. And I was at a conference, and this is when I first started. So I hadn't quite grasped the power of citizen diplomacy just yet. But this woman from Kazakhstan was receiving an award. And during her award speech, she had mentioned that she had gone to the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Salt Lake in Salt Lake City, Utah, and just learned about their model. It was an hour and a half meeting. Part of it was like a service project, and the service project was them playing with the kids, and seeing what their recreation was all about. And she was so inspired by their model and got all of their resources while she was visiting with them. She went back to her country and she opened up a Boys and Girls Club there. And then she opened up two more. And by the time she had received this award, she had opened up 10 of these clubs in her community and surrounding villages and towns, right? And I went up to her afterwards and I was like, and I'm a data nerd. I think we all need to be collecting better data, right? So I went up to her afterwards and I was like, this is blowing my mind. I cannot believe that this is so incredible, the work that you're doing based off of an hour and a half meeting. I'm like, how many kids have you served? And she's like, oh, Felecia, I can easily tell you how many kids I've served. But let me tell you the bigger impact of these centers that I opened. It is that when the kids are in these centers, their parents are coming in and taking these extra classes. And so the kids being in the center are not only influencing themselves, but they're influencing their family structures. And when you influence the family structures, you influence the entire community as a whole. And she's like, that is immeasurable. Our impact of what we've been able to do with these 10 centers cannot be measured at this point because it has made our entire community more peaceful. The kids are getting in less trouble. It's things that we cannot measure because it's prevention at that point. And it was something as simple as an hour and a half meeting, being able to change an entire community. Like that just opened my eyes to how impactful the concept of citizen diplomacy is. And the concept of citizen diplomacy is simply, everybody having the right, even the responsibility to shape foreign relations, and it's done one handshake at a time.
I love it's the people being with other people as humans and
Mhm.
actually seeing each other, right?
Right? Yeah. Unbelievable. Yeah,
Really.
yeah, just one more story really quickly. And this one, like it was heart-wrenching. And it was, we had a group from Ukraine that was here in Utah right before the war started. Like we
Mhm.
put them on the plane the day before the airports were going to shut down, knowing what they were going back to.
Wow.
And I just remember, I had the honor of taking one of the visitors to a grocery store because she really wanted American cream cheese, right? She had heard about it. She wanted to try it. I'm like, great, let's go get you some cream cheese because why not? And as we're walking around the grocery store, she gets her cream cheese. We go over to the gourmet cheese section and she finds this Ukrainian cheese in the gourmet section. She's like, this is our equivalent of cream cheese. She's like, what is it doing in your nice gourmet cream cheese section? And it was just those little pinpoints of similarity of we have so much in common with each other from around the world. If we would just be quiet for a minute and listen to each other.
I feel like the theme of listening has been pervasive this season of my recording of these podcasts because almost every lesson has had something to do with how important it is to listen to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
your work as a citizen diplomat is so important to that. Can you describe to me how you see like what is the relationship between subtle radicalism and citizen diplomacy? How do you link those two in terms of kind of your life path?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's the handshake that we meet each other. I in my job of working with refugees and now at Utah Global Diplomacy, every once in a while I pull out a map and I count how many countries I've engaged with just through my jobs. And I have not done extensive international travel by any means. And the last time I counted, it's 173 different countries. That means
That's
that when,
amazing.
right? But
Wow.
it's insane. And somebody asked me, well, what countries haven't you met? And I'm like, that's a good question. I don't really know. And so this time when I was counting, I paid attention to the countries that I passed over. And a lot of them are these like really tiny islands that you have to have a very specific reason to go. Um, but I think, I mean, the fact that I could meet people from 173 different countries means that when I am listening to the news or reading the newspaper and I see something that is happening in that country, it brings me back to those people that I have met. And all of a sudden, it makes the world incredibly small. And I
Yeah.
care about it so much more because those are my friends. Those are the people that I have shared meals with, that we have laughed at meetings, that I have gone to their house and met their children. Like it really does bring the world so close. And I think that if we were able to connect with each other, where we stop being so divided between each other and saying, well, you believe in that, or you're from that place, or you are this person, or you're that ism, and instead just recognize each other as friends because we shared something as simple as we just sat down together and met each other and talked to one another. Like, how much more wonderful would the world be if
Yeah.
we just thought of each other as friends? And I
Yeah.
get, like, I'm not naive. I get that this is a very Pollyanna approach to world peace, but it works.
It's why those things that you talked about at the beginning, the the music and the books and those things that like bring us into someone's life uh
Mhm.
are able to humanize us all and remind ourselves that people, ultimately we're so similar, whether like we're still all looking for a way to feed our families, and
Mhm.
we still all experience our parents passing away somehow, or
Yeah.
sometimes we do, right? Like, but there's like human experiences that we all can share with each other.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly.
I'm interested in this idea of both of like the way that you bring diplomacy, which is in fact subtly radical. This, I'm going to listen to people and I'm going to reach across a table and shake your hand and share a meal. Can you describe to me how that diplomacy, subtle radicalism, how does that show up for you in your marriage or your relationship with your child? Like, what
Mm,
does that
that's
mean?
yeah, that's a really good question. Um, I mean, my husband and I, we met so young, right? We, of course, when you're young, you've got those similarities of what kind of music do you like? I like that kind of music, right? And so I feel like that has always been part of my marriage foundation is like, how can we rock the boat just a little, right? And I would say
I kind of
that,
like that though. That's kind of fun.
right, right. And so together as a powerhouse, and all of our families are still here in Utah, um, we just find little ways to jab at thoughts that, and thoughts these days that seem to be more prevalent than others of why do you think that way? And have you thought about this? And, what would it look like if maybe we started thinking about it in this way? And I feel like we're a power couple when it comes to how can we just sort of put that little irritation when family parties are getting together and being not of the same opinion as a lot of our families. So I think that that's one way that we can do subtle radicalism. um the For my daughter, I we have really interesting conversations after school,
Hmm.
specifically of like if she's taught something, why is that taught as truth? And I'll give you just a really clear example. So when she was little, of course they would celebrate Columbus Day and talking about all of the amazing things that Christopher Columbus did. Well, being an adult, we now recognize that he was not a good person by any means. And so, not when she was so little that she couldn't comprehend the horribleness that the world has to offer, but when she was in fourth and fifth and sixth grade, it was, well, let's start talking about this. And did you know that Christopher Columbus actually did this? And did you know that because of what he did, it has had this ripple effect on this, right? And so, just linking these things and trying to get her to critically think
Hmm.
through what is she being told and is it accurate? Is there another side to the story? And in my opinion, I think that those are the conversations we need to be having with young people. We need to be having these critical conversations with young people to think differently because they are the change of the future. They're the change of now. Um, and they're going to do by far better than our generation did and the generation before us. And so, how do we empower them with the tool of thinking about others and being empathetic to others, so that they can make the world a better place as well?
Oh, I love that. I love that so much. And I feel like our young people often teach us that as if it's like
Mhm.
that whole it's inherent in us to have empathy. Maybe not when we're really
Oh,
small, but like as we get
yeah.
older and we're, a young child, it is my daughter, even now, if she has a treat, she automatically offers me half of it. Like she will
Mhm.
automatically be like, would you like to share? Like there's this idea of,
Uh-huh.
community that is
Uh-huh.
almost inherent. Um, and then we
Yeah.
somehow
Yeah.
get that out of us as we get older.
Yeah, young kids just have this beauty about them that there is unfairness in the world, and it is something that needs to be addressed. Like
Yes.
unfairness is not tolerated, and we need to rectify it immediately. They get it. How come we as adults can't get it any
Yeah.
longer? That there's unfairness, and how do we come together to fix the unfairness in the world?
I was thinking about this idea of when you said that you were interested in talking about subtle radicalism, and I was trying to think of like how do I see subtle radicalism happening? And it reminded me of this. I've seen this whole, and maybe this shows my algorithms that I get, but I've seen like this whole social media thing that has to do with how are people micro feminists, right? Like what are the little
Oh,
micro feminism things to do? And examples would be if you're in a meeting and someone says, like you always say, like one person said, I'm a leader of an organization. And when somebody needs to take notes, I always look at the man in the meeting first instead of the woman,
mm-hmm,
because we've always been looking at women to take the notes or whatever.
mm-hmm.
Or when I send an email, and it's to several people, I'll put the women's names first instead of the man's name. Like,
Yes.
um, and it's like a little subtle, very micro feminist thing to do. And I thought, it might align with the idea of subtle radicalism, just like
Uh-huh.
changing small little ways of asking a question or addressing an issue that
Yeah.
is not traditional.
Oh yeah, I'm going to get on a soapbox to defend your what you just said, and that is getting names right. To me, is one of the most subtle radicalist things that you can do. I don't even know if that was a word, right? But
Mm.
so my name Felecia is spelled with two E's instead of the traditional way of two I's, and I cannot tell you how many people in powerful positions misspell my name, even after I've corrected them numerous times and said, oh, my name's actually spelled with two E's instead of two I's. They continue to do that. Like just that sheer respect of I'm going to spell your name correctly and pronounce your name correctly is one of the kindest things that you can do to show respect to someone else. Like
Uh,
subtle radicalism, take a second to understand somebody's name.
I think that is so powerful because how often do we do that in situations? How often do I hear people do that, especially with names that don't sound so Americanized? And
Mm-hmm.
what we hear people saying are things like, "Oh, I don't I'm going to try to say it, but I'm going to butcher it. So sorry." Instead of
Mm-hmm.
actually just asking them in advance or saying, "Can you help me learn how to pronounce your name?"
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So this is an open invitation. If I spell your name incorrectly or I say your name incorrectly, like please correct me because it truly is we are equal and you are again worthy of my respect that I'm going to get your name right.
That's awesome. When we're talking about people in positions of power, is there a way to exercise subtle radicalism as an employer? Because I think if, like your boss is
Mm.
it come into play as a in any type of a leadership role or as a leader of an organization. Have you thought about that at all?
Yeah, excellent question. Because I am definitely, I wouldn't say a micromanager, but I like to be in the know of what is going on. And I think there's a couple of things that, we as bosses can do in the workplace. One is trust our employees. I mean, if we hired them, we should be able to trust that they're able to get the job done. Maybe they need some guidance, and that's perfectly fine. But they're going to deliver the products that you need them to deliver. So trust in employees, I think, is incredible. Um, I would say, taking a look at the bigger picture of who the people are that are working for you and giving them space to be humans. So we always put, human circumstances before employment circumstances. If you're a working mom or a working dad and you need to stay home a little bit extra in the summertime because summers are really difficult for working parents, then you know what? It's going to be perfectly fine. if you work remotely. That's okay. Your child is sick and you need to drop meetings for the day. That is perfectly fine. Don't come to work sick and don't worry about sending your child to daycare sick,
Mm.
right? So allowing there to be space for human situations to occur and not having it count against them as being humans. I feel like how crazy radical is that, right? Um, but then also looking at career development
Mm.
and really working alongside them to say, how do we scale up what it is that you ultimately want to do in your career? So like I've got an employee right now that really wants to work on her leadership skills and public speaking skills. And so I'm trying to find different boards for her to sit on, conferences for her to present. What kind of speech classes can she go to be able to improve her public speaking? And so really looking at jobs, and especially for, it's just a different time. People don't stay in their jobs forever any longer, which
Yeah.
is perfectly fine. What is the next stepping stone and how can I help you get there successfully?
I love that. It's something that we often don't think of, and those are absolutely subtly radical things to do as a
Right.
boss. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that we are talking through and then end up talking about our role as bosses or leaders, because I would imagine you are probably serving already as a mentor to individuals on your team. And I would love to give you an opportunity to speak about mentors in your life. It's a theme that
Hmm.
I have that none of us get here without people showing up for us who may not have even realized that they showed up for us in
Yeah.
ways that help us. So, is there anybody or that you would like to honor by talking about their mentorship that to you?
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. There's so many. There's so many. And again, I think this goes back to the very beginning of our conversation when it was like I had to figure shit out in order to get things done. Um, and it would not have been possible without the people in my lives who continually show up for me and say, well, have you thought about this? And, you did this, maybe think about it in a different way. The person that comes to mind immediately is Beth Marshall, who was the previous executive director to me in this role as being the executive director of Utah Global Diplomacy. I met her when she was working for the English Skills Learning Center. We were both working with refugees, and I had ran into some professional problems that just really were traumatic, to tell you the truth. It was not a good time for me. Um, I had made some decisions, and then I was also bold enough to make some decisions, and people said that I was arrogant, and it ruined my reputation. And I just remember we would go to these coffee meetings and just talk to one another and say, what are you working on? And it's almost like we take turns. Like, she'll spend one coffee meeting listening to me talk about everything that I'm working through, and then vice versa, I'll listen to her. Um, and then she had a position open at Utah Global Diplomacy and said, I want you to come and work for me because I know you, I trust you. And so I started doing our events. Um, and then a few months later, she had to move to Germany with her husband. And she said, actually, I brought you in because I would love for you to apply to try to be the executive director of this organization. And so the continual, like, can I just ping ideas off of you? Can I get your input on this? Or I'm just having a crappy day and I need to just tell somebody how pissed off I am today. Um, I mean, she really has been that professional friend that I've been able to rely on at least for the last 15 years. And sometimes your mentors are your friends.
I love that. I love that it's the mentor is not like, this is also subtly radical, Felecia, that it's somebody who is
Uh-huh.
not like up above you that you've been looking up to forever. It's somebody who is your peer and
Mhm.
has been your peer and has seen you. Uh,
Yeah.
Even especially when they saw you during the hard times.
Yeah, exactly.
I
Yeah.
love that story. That's amazing.
Yeah. Thank you.
So thank you so much for spending time talking to me today. I think what you're going to bring to the conversation for our listeners is going to be really important and really helpful um, because we all need to practice a little more subtle radicalism in our lives.
Oh, 100%. And if anyone gets lost on how do you do that in your lives, I'm happy to sit down and just brainstorm ideas.
I love it. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for spending
Yeah.
time with me today. I
Um,
appreciate it. This is going to be
yeah.
great fun to get out there into the world. As you may be able to tell, Felecia has extensive experience in understanding and collecting oral histories and storytelling. And she says that she believes that through capturing stories, we can create a sense of self, explore the world, organize and pass on our knowledge to others, and create a sense of shared humanity. She's certainly done that with us today. Thank you so much, Felecia, for your stories, for your insight, and of course, for your subtle radicalism. As she says, if you'd like to see her nerd out, you can connect with her and ask her about nonprofit management or data collection or music and gardening and outdoor adventuring. She is an amazing bicycle racer. You can connect with her at LinkedIn, and you can learn more about citizen diplomacy at www.utahglobaldiplomacy.org. And I hope you join us next time, where we will be speaking with Kyle Vandermeulen from American Philanthropic. And the focus will be on integrity.